So good morning, and for my friends who flew in from the East Coast last night, good afternoon. You're starting to enjoy the afternoon. So thank you to John and to Dr. Day for including me today and inviting me to give my perspective on where we are today with 5G, as well as where we see the industry headed with respect to next G. I very much appreciate that the conference is not called a 6G conference. So we're in. I don't know how many of you are experiencing this right now, but we're in the spring of 6G. And in AT&T, we like to say next G instead of 6G. And the simple reason is we are trying to avoid a situation where we think that innovation only comes on 10-year boundaries. There really is a situation today where we see so much happening, especially on the AI front. And the theme of this conference is about AI. We see so much emerging that isn't going to wait for a 10-year cycle, that isn't going to be driven based on a 10-year cycle. We've seen challenges in trying to think of re-architecting our network, and we really experienced it directly on the evolution to 5G SA core, that there are challenges with moving towards cloud native overall, and what we try to do as we evolve the network. So from my perspective, we are talking more about continuous innovation. You'll hear it from my leadership, you'll hear it from my team. We're trying to find, together with our partners in academia, as well as in industry itself, to figure out how can we make it more continuous in terms of how we introduce innovation, and no wine before it's time. So we all probably can relate to stories of things that we think may have shown up in the early days of 5G, and we said, okay, was it really ready to scale? Was it really ready to deploy in a mass environment, in a macro environment? So maybe just to comment on what drives us today and what moves forward. How do I move things forward slide-wise? Just click on this. Oh.
There should be a clicker there for you. And can you speak closer to the mic? Thank you.
Sure. Where is the clicker? This is the clicker. Oh, I clicked. Somehow I clicked. This is the clicker. Oh, can you take me back?
Just unplug it, Hannah, and give it to him.
Thank you. Now, is this streamed or was just everybody here? This is so just people are here. So the thing that to keep in mind, and why we invested so heavily, in particular around mid-band spectrum as well as our competitors, was that we really needed it. Finally, we needed 5G primarily to support the ongoing traffic. The traffic itself continues to grow at a phenomenal rate. Our numbers are not radically different from our competitors who are here, but 26% cumulative average growth rate, specifically on the data side. So we needed additional spectrum. We needed additional capability. That new spectrum came with ties, higher bandwidths, but at higher frequencies, so driving us towards massive MIMO and massive MIMO deployment. But finally, we see significant increase in the mobile traffic. We also see significant increases in our fixed line traffic as we start to migrate some of our copper lines specifically to fixed wireless. We are seeing that those consumers who were on copper lines before are consuming more data on a wireless connection than they consumed on a copper connection before. This is actually a pretty startling thing to see. Somebody who spent most of their life happy on XDSL or DSL suddenly switches over to a wireless connection and wants to consume more data. We haven't been as aggressive, to be blunt and honest, on fixed wireless as some of our competitors, because we were worried about the impact to the network itself because of the mobile subs and the mobile subscribers, and we didn't have quite the good spectrum position of some of our competitors in the mid-band side. So we were a little bit slower to adopt that, but we're really impressed overall with the interest in fixed wireless. It's one of the fastest selling, fastest growing products in AT&T history. And I'm sure our competitors are also equally happy with where they're going on it. What we've seen in general, though, is that this was unlocked really primarily through 5G. So 5G is providing us with the opportunity to really grow dramatically the amount of data. But this is the conundrum for any operator. We're a utility company to a degree, but unlike other utility companies, we don't charge based on consumption. So can you imagine a world where an electric company provided unlimited electricity to your house? Or a water company provided unlimited water to your house? What kind of behavior would it encourage? What kind of behavior would you expect to see? So we are always trying to figure out, how do we stay ahead of this, and what technologies do we need? So we have a unique challenge and that we generally are driven based on build cycles. But if you look at the power system grid, or if you look at any other large scale utility, they're 40-year cycles. They're not cycles where, and I actually like John's chart because I just think you should blow up that 1.5 years difference between releases. You should make that, because some people think, especially in our leadership, that every real innovation only comes on a 10-year boundary. It doesn't really happen that way. So, I mean, I think it's really important to say that we are innovating and we are providing these changes that are needed to continuously support the growth and consumers themselves. Now, I want to make sure that I don't go too long here and give plenty of time for the panel itself. I think John already covered to some degree where we see important use cases as we advance to 5G and move forward in 5G Advanced itself. Some of the more interesting use cases for us in particular are around RedCap, and we've been partnering with Qualcomm quite heavily on early trials, early capabilities specifically for that, and we're looking forward to launching that aggressively. In fact, as many of you know, we announced a fairly large deal last December with Ericsson, and a lot of that was about us essentially moving much faster on our ability towards coverage for 5G SA across the network. So in addition to building out mid-band frequencies, and we have a bit more complexity than the other guys in that we have 2 mid-band frequencies, we have 345 as well as 37, so C-band as well as the ambit band. That challenge, coupled with the challenge of wanting to grow SA out at scale, pushed us in a direction to try to accelerate and renovate and refresh the network all in parallel. And a lot of the refresh is driven around sustainability targets. Our radio access network today consumes north of $1 billion in power. So going through renovation and through the partnerships we have with Ericsson, as well as what we've done now with Open RAN, and just 2 weeks ago. So some folks think the deal was only about Ericsson itself. But as you saw in the last couple of weeks, we've announced deals with Dell, and we just issued an RFP specifically for radio coming from disruptive players as well as incumbents. We're also partnering quite heavily with the U.S. government on this new activity, this new notice of funding, part 2, to bring new radio open in the network, which we believe will give us not just a cost benefit, but also sustainability advantage. So we think that's a big part of moving the networks forward towards green as we stay in this sort of 5G era before we go to the next G. So again, I think what we want to make sure it's absolutely crystal clear to everyone is that we're not going to come up and stand up in front of audiences. I know some of our friends in Europe have said they don't want 6G. They don't want innovation. They're happy with what they have. We are not. We are always looking for more innovation from our partners, and we're happy to be working with Qualcomm and Ericsson and Nokia amongst others, and to try to get to more innovation in the network. What we've seen typically happen is that a lot of this is happening in a waterfall-like way, or a cascade of waterfalls. So even though we have an ability today to consume software releases in a continuous delivery fashion, we finally see the accumulation as a pool of water. What we want to get to is back into the mode of thinking of how do we bring things into the network quickly? How do we work this through SDOs and through device ecosystems to say that we can now bring this in carefully? A little bit of an ode to Claude Shannon, that he wasn't just about information theory. He was also playing, and he was also tinkering, and he was also experimenting in particular with, and some of you know the story about the mouse and the maze, but I won't go into that detail here, but just simply to say that we're looking for those opportunities. For us, we look at next G, I won't use 6G here in that context. We see that at least half of it is more or less moving in a direction which is the traditional fashion, but then the other side is probably disruptive. So, immersive communication for us, massive communication, hyper reliable, a lot of these are almost just building off what we saw specifically coming out of 5G and 5G Advanced. Integrated AI and communication for us looks like a disruptive thing. It looks like something that we can bring into the network in pieces. Same thing with integrated sensing and communication. I was very happy to see also in John's chart about integrated sensing and communication showing up in release 19 as opposed to being part of the release 20 train and being part of the 6G sort of direction. Ubiquitous connectivity, some of you probably don't know what that means. I took a long time for me to remember, okay, finally it's NTN. I don't know why they just didn't put NTN next to it, but you probably saw the announcements yesterday. This is happening independent of G cycles. We see new announcements every day, and we announced something pretty significant yesterday with Verizon in particular around the ability to support this. We're very excited about this. This gives AST an opportunity to grow and fund forward. Are we done there? Do we think this is the only way that we're going to have NTN in the network? No, I think users will continue to demand more. Once they actually get a taste of it, they're probably going to ask for more data and the ability to sustain and support more, which will drive us back to standards-based solutions and more spectrum. But to provide a coverage layer and an anchor layer is a critical thing, and we think this is a great deal for both companies. So just to kind of round it out, and I'm going to try to wrap up here on this slide. I do have another slide, but I'll probably save that discussion for the panel. What we're really trying to see and make sure that the message is very clear is that we see that AI, spectrum, and cloud are really not being developed on a 10-year horizon. The technologies underlying for FR3, what we see coming and emerging right now, we would like to see that investment take place before WRC makes a decision and blesses, okay, this is what we think is the spectrum for 6G. We also think there's still opportunity, perhaps even in 6 gigahertz in the US. We also see a lot of opportunity with cloud players. We get a variety of partners that approach us with really innovative ideas about how to leverage cloud in our network, and we have to move more aggressively towards less fragmentation for the types of clouds that we have in the network. We have, at last count, something like 8 on the access side, 8 different cloud platforms running currently in our network. For us, that creates challenges because of the fragmentation and because of the interoperability. So we were looking at the O-RAN Alliance to help solve this problem. We see 3GPP not really embracing it so much, and we think there's probably gaps to be solved there and to be fixed. On the AI front, and this is a big theme for the conference, I think we want more AI. We want AI in the RAN, we want AI on the RAN, and we want AI next to the RAN. We're doing it already next to the RAN. It's a big part of our story around analytics. We're bringing generative AI specifically to support not just our customers, but also to support our engineers, our developers, to say, how can we actually understand what's happening in our network today? So this is a big part of the use case for us today, but we're looking forward to see those kinds of innovations that are embedded deeply in the network, whether on the device side or on the infra side specifically, and how we do modulation and demodulation, or in particular on how we do scheduling decisions or call admission control. So we're really excited about the opportunities that AI brings overall. And we like to see them happen, not necessarily, again, coherent with a G cycle. As we move to platforms which are more open, more programmable, and inevitably more multi-vendor, and I know that makes some of our partners cringe whenever we say that, but I'm going to say it anyways. As we move to that direction, we think that it's important that we drive an imperative to say that these technologies need to come not on strict 10-year horizons. Okay, so on that I'll stop and I'll give back. The only hint I'd give you is that we're looking really, the benefit that we see in what we've brought forward in our new network is that we bring a network management layer that can address everything across the network itself. And that gives us an opportunity to introduce new innovation without waiting for a G cycle. Thank you, guys.
Well, yeah, thank you very much, Robin. I think we move to our panel now, right? So, yeah, let me begin by welcoming all the other panelists. So we have Carl Newsman from Nokia Bell Labs, kind of principal researcher there, DMTS as it's called in Bell Labs speak, or distinguished member of the technical team. And then Kari, who needs no introduction, senior VP at T-Mobile, driving so much of the technology strategy side as well as the standardization, et cetera. And then Misha, our colleague from Ericsson, who's the VP of Emerging Technologies, and he's also going to be giving a talk a little bit later, but a lot of exciting technology leadership and perspectives from Misha. And then obviously we've just heard from Rob Soni, a VP of RAN strategy and architecture at Nokia. And so, I'm sorry, at AT&T. Getting my companies mixed up here. I know, exactly, right after their Ericsson announcement, nonetheless, too. So, no, so it's certainly, first of all, like a huge honor to be up here moderating a panel with such key leaders across, 2 of the key vendors and 2 of the key operators. So that's going to give a really balanced view. And even the discussion, I had a fun time kind of sending these guys 10 questions that were pretty broad, and I'll kind of circulate. We won't do the everyone gets an answer to the same question. We'll kind of move them around a little bit. So maybe I'll start with a question. Maybe I'll start one to Ericsson, which is kind of almost alluded to from the last slide. And so how do you see services at the network side? So we talk of control plane and user plane, and you can just use WhatsApp, or you can use Verizon or AT&T or T-Mobile messaging. So how do you look at kind of APIs, and how does that changing in your view when you look at APIs and network interfaces?
So we have we think we did great design through GPP and the Orion Alliance on the mechanics. So run core network and all that. But we somehow forgot get the fundamentals right on the monetization. So Ericsson thought what, let's spend a little bit of our free cash flow, and we spend $6 billion on a small shop in San Francisco called Vonage, which is one of the API leaders really dealing with the wide enterprise world. And what we really acquired there is an ecosystem. So it's less about the API capability, but really an ecosystem which speaks API, knows what networks are good for, and we are now integrating that natively into our stack. So the idea is to really have the developer world understand, the network not necessarily needs to be a dumb pipe. There's actually a lot of intelligence there. It's not only on the edges, it's not only in the Qualcomm devices or on the cloud side, but it's really the network in between, which can offer a lot of intelligent features too. So that's what we were driving. It's taking momentum now. So we have our friends Nokia jumped on. We have now other players as well. So the market is now really taking momentum through the Linux Foundation initiatives, etc. So we're quite happy, and of course we'd like to for this to happen a bit quicker, so we don't have to wait 10 years hopefully. But yeah, it's a good development and an important one to really enable the business viability.
Yep, thanks a lot, Misha. And so maybe kind of dovetailing on that, a question to Kari from T-Mobile. How do you look at the consumer side and the enterprise side in terms of the similarity of types of applications, or how you look at your network and the investments you need to make?
I mean, there are obviously synergies, lots of synergies between the two domains. But at the same time, I would say that it all is based on foundational capability that 5G gave us, and especially the standalone 5G that we've spent tens of billions of dollars on over the past few years to kind of get it to a point where it's rather ubiquitous. And I think the enterprise segment in general is moving away from just core connectivity into more of a solution space. And for the first time, they've been able to try out and really experience what 5G can provide to them. And that creates momentum and interest and sort of demand for 5G services in the enterprise space. But ultimately, it's also people, humans, us consumers, that sort of these enterprises consist of. So there are still lots of synergies between the two. You have to think about things like security. You have to think about things like just like that basic connectivity. You have to think about how do I have my work profile and my personal profile seamlessly working with one another. And then, of course, the benefits of 5G, the latency, the speed, the capacity, all these new things that come with it sort of applies in both domains. So I would say that use cases are sometimes slightly different, but there is that connecting tissue between the two that's driving developments in both of these domains quite closely with one another.
Okay, well, no, thanks a lot, because it is always this interesting thing of, we joke about the Gordon Gekko phone, where that was like, okay, yeah, bye-bye cell, and that was the joke that what started as like a business phone for wealthy people became like a consumer device globally. And so when are things like consumer-led versus enterprise-led? And it's always an interesting question, so great to get your perspective. Now, a question to Carl, kind of on the role of AI in the network. And so I know you're kind of a key AI researcher. So how do you look at some of the biggest priorities and kind of technical work that lies ahead in that domain?
Right. It's a great question. I see AI as being a real enabler for a lot of things. Sometimes we think of it as a driver, or it's a trend or something, but it's got a lot of promise. It making kind of opening doors. So, for example, we talk about sensing. Sensing, sometimes we think of it as a hardware. It's making use of the physical signals out there. But with AI, even without changing anything about the information available, it can leverage a lot more out of it. So the sensing that there is, maybe we'll add new sensing capabilities, but the promise of AI is to extract and fuse a whole lot more of what's already there. I think another side of, there's also the obviously potential to drive improvements, optimizations in network performance and what we can do in the network itself. And there's big challenges there, though, in terms of standardization. There's things that AI is naturally good at, fusing, understanding, recognizing patterns. But there's things that are kind of natively hard, like interoperation, like working across devices, reliability, being 100% sure. So there's big challenges, but also big opportunities that it can enable.
And I think what's interesting a little
Yeah.
bit is for those of us who studied like physical layer communications, we would talk of like match filter, and you could have a transmit side filtering and a receive side filtering, and square root raised cosine as an example, and you take the convolution of all or multiplying in frequency domain, and you have this perspective of partitioning. What do you do with the transmit? What do you do with the receive? And I think that's what Carl's alluding to is when a company like Meta or another big cloud player is doing AI and they have their cloud NVIDIA processors and they're doing all their great stuff, they know what they need to do and they do it. Mm-hmm. And whereas wireless is inherently two things communicating, and going back to the picture of Shannon. And so that's what's kind of extra hard. And then if you standardize AI, then what's truly in the specification versus what's a base station implementation and a device implementation, and then how do they do the partitioning? And as you raised the challenge of interoperability, then is there going to be all these different ones, or is there just one standard, right? So the reason your phone works when you get off the plane in Tokyo and you're talking to Docomo is because they implemented the standard and you're just able to do that. So it's a really interesting one, that edge side. And maybe like a question to Rob a little bit on that perspective. You showed some network traffic statistics, and great to see the CAGR of growth, because it's one of the things that the consumption of data and the generation of data has always been growing. So from your view, what subset of that growth becomes AI at the edge, right? So when the applications are changing, it's not just everyone's watching more Netflix and more Amazon Prime, it's actually stuff's changing. So how do you view designing or future-proofing your network for some of this evolution of on-device AI and hybrid AI?
It's a really good question. I think just to level set on where we are today, I think today we see around 60 to 70% of the mobile traffic we have today is video. 60 to 70% is video. It's huge. Behind that, of course, is a lot of AI to figure out how to deliver that efficiently. We've moved from a world of download and play or continuous streaming into a world where somebody is actually watching 10 videos at once. Does anyone actually watch 10 videos at once?
Do it.
So it turns out that this real phenomena that some of us are addicted to, or maybe not, or our kids are. It turns out that it's pushing 10 streams at the same time, so that you can flip channels, right? So you see one stream because you have only one pair of eyes. At least I only have one pair of eyes. But you can't get 10 streams at the same time. But you want to be able to flip between them. People eject and jump out before they actually finish one stream and start looking at the next one. So what we're seeing, at least right now on the consumer side, is that video traffic is dominating our consumption and our consumption patterns. What I look forward to and what we're trying to understand is as we see growth in enterprise traffic, and sadly, I've still got two phones. I've got an enterprise phone and I've got a home phone or a personal phone. I've segregated my traffic and my usage across two different patterns, different sets of software, different sets of behavior. And you can imagine, of course, hopefully the next time I come to this conference, I'll be carrying one phone and I'll feel comfortable with that. There are lots of reasons why somebody carries two phones versus one phone. But right now I don't feel comfortable with that because of the software that runs on my enterprise grade device versus what runs on my personal device. And to some degree, I don't want people looking at, okay, what am I looking at my personal device versus on I don't want my company to see pictures of my kids. I just don't want them to do it. But things like that. So in the end, I think there is, and we've seen announcements, some operators are leading more aggressively and trying to say, okay, there's an opportunity to stake ground out and say, we're going to build Edge, it's going to be AI enabled, and we're going to onboard a number of applications that ultimately drive consumption and usage, and hopefully be able to charge for that. It's definitely emerging. I will say that we're not yet convinced that the application providers will allow the operators the ability to run and be a hosting agent. We've been through that story before on Edge, not for AI workloads. AI may be the thing that changes it because of the issues with data. So to your point and to your question, it could be we're at a fundamental pivot point where operators start to look more like edge providers than to look like typical download and play video.
And so maybe you go ahead,
Yeah,
Kari.
Can I
Yeah.
add to that? I
Yes.
mean, I agree. And the question on what percentage of our growth is going to come from AI, the answer is I have no clue at this point in time.
Yep.
But hopefully down the road I will know. I know it's coming. It's inevitable, and I hope it's coming, because I agree we have to, and we're going to push more intelligence to the edge of the network, and AI is driving a lot of that. And it's not just AI for external AI workloads; it's also AI for our internal workloads. In our business, frontline operations, whether that's care or retail or other things like that, AI has tremendous potential in streamlining operations and creating efficiencies. And this notion of AI in, for, and with RAN that also Rob talked about definitely applies. And eventually down the road, I think AI is going to make its way all the way into the network functions, not today, but down the road, again, to change some of the things that we have taken for granted for so long. But in the meantime, we have to be able to harness the power of network in terms of analytics, information, data that it provides to different AI applications, and vice versa. AI can help us run our networks more efficiently. Either that's for field techs that maybe don't have an answer for all the questions they can ask, and AI can help with that, or maybe streamlining some of the tedious tasks that are there, like creating mobs for things that you have to do. That's the power of AI. But what we don't really, I think, understand at this point in time is, and it's moving super fast. I've never seen anything move as fast as AI is moving right now, is that what does it actually mean in terms of the end game? How do we dimension the edge appropriately for some of these workloads? What is the associated cost with that? There's still some hallucination taking place in the AI world. How do we test and make sure that when we ask and rely on AI providing us information, it's actually accurate and makes sense? How do we do sort of a split inference between what goes on in the device and what goes in the network? How do we create interoperability between these two in a most efficient way? And I'm only saying these things because I think many of you are working on research and kind of looking into these things. And it's very important that we think about it through a lens of what are some of the practical challenges that the end users of AI, meaning the operators and other entities, would face as we go through this deployment and evolution of harnessing the power of AI. And we can learn from where we are today, so that down the road, as it becomes ubiquitous in our world, we make it the best possible way. Because the risk is that we do it the wrong way, and then we just end up building something that's massive, costs an arm and a leg, and doesn't in the end provide the benefits that outweigh the associated costs.
And so what's always interesting, because I mentioned also when you talked about FWA and the challenge of predicting, right? So I think that's the fundamental challenge of an operator and your infrastructure vendor partners is you have to kind of build for tomorrow, because today's already happening. And so this perspective of multi-device plans, right? So we have obviously cell phones, a big part of the data traffic. And then we start having 5G connected smartwatches as an example. Augmented virtual reality is coming. And we have 5G connected vehicles. And so when you look at something like the 5G connected PC, and I know there's operator pricing plans that are publicly available, on both your websites for, if I search 5G PC in the T-Mobile or AT&T or your competitors for that matter, it's an interesting one. In your view, for the 5G connected laptop, is that a technical challenge or a value prop challenge? And I know Ericsson's also working on some interesting techniques in that area. So maybe we can let the operator speak first, and then Misha.
Yeah, just an interesting observation. I think I've noticed, at least amongst my colleagues at AT&T, we're all given 5G connected iPads, and I don't ask me at what level that stops, because I couldn't tell you the answer. But probably anyone director or above has the ability to get, without any challenge, a 5G connected iPad. And I've noticed that when I'm sitting at my desk at home, or I'm sitting at my desk at headquarters, I use my laptop. But the minute I get up, I take my iPad with me. And I noticed this actually socially, that everybody's doing this, that finally it's so much easier to just take your iPad with you because it's always connected. I don't have to type in a password. I don't have to think about security. It's already connected. And sometimes the Wi-Fi in the building, granted it's an AT&T building, still is not that great. And so we complain, but still it doesn't get better. And somehow, inevitably, those tickets come back to me. And I'm like wondering, why am I trying to solve Wi-Fi problems in Dallas when I live in Columbus? But nonetheless, what I can see though, and this morning, again, I sitting out here on the lawn and thinking to myself, am I going to take my laptop out? Am I going to take my iPad out? And my iPad has a nice integrated keyboard that I use. And what I'm seeing is that it's better to take the iPad out because I don't have to think about connectivity. And I think in the context of, is it a enterprise-led technology? Absolutely, because it's a huge boost in productivity. But for a consumer, the issue is cost. So when you think about, is somebody going to start dumping their existing laptops for 5G connectivity or enabling it, it probably is not a technical impediment. It's probably a cost impediment of having to buy this additional device.
Okay, and then Kari, from the operator perspective.
No, I agree. It's exactly that. It's not a technical impediment necessarily. And there's an age-old saying that if it's not broken, don't fix it. But I think there's a second part to that. But if you are going to fix it with something better, right? And I think 5G definitely has benefits over Wi-Fi in terms of technical capabilities, but that seamlessness in terms of how easy it is to take it into use. I'm okay going to a store and buying a laptop, and I know it comes with at least some foundational software that I need. But if I have to bring in a third component, which is the subscription, how do I provision that? Who's going to be my provider? Is it going to work everywhere? Is it the same provider as I have for my smartphone? Those are the types of things that I think we need to streamline and make it more seamless and easier, so that if I buy a 5G laptop, I don't have to think about it. It's not hard for me. But then I also agree with Rob that there's still, at least on the consumer side, this behavioral component that we need to think about, that what is easy. I'm also, the only Apple device that you use is my iPad because it's so easy to use everywhere and carry around when I'm on the move. Laptop I use mainly just for work. And when you have multiple different devices, you have to think about that aspect too. With that though, I think 5G finally is bringing the benefits that are needed so that it makes sense to have wireless or cellular connectivity in laptops, as long as we can make it easy for users to adopt and make it so that the cost side of it also be as painless as it can be. Because I don't want to deal with multiple different bills and multiple different this and that. And if I have to go through 10 different screens to activate something, not going to do that.
And I think we've seen, at least, and I'm sure you guys have seen this as well, is that in many cases our network is far better than what the Wi-Fi is that's available.
And so that's the point, that the capacity is there. And it goes back to this fear of, because the funny thing is people say, well, I don't need native 5G in the laptop because I can just tether. But that's that's zero sum from the network utilization. If you're tethering, you're using bits over the air anyways, and you might as well natively do it to the laptop, if that makes sense. So I know Ericsson's looking at some interesting models for.
Yeah, I think,
cellular
from
laptop.
the, just reflecting on what Rob and Kari were saying, from a mechanics point of view, I'm hopeful. Because we got the Qualcomm chips, right? So Dell, I think, laptop is playing along. From an infrastructure point of view, I think Ericsson, Nokia can handle that. A few call flows need to be actually, sorted out, specifically from an IT point of view. As you come into your office, and 5G isn't great, you want to hand over into Wi-Fi and the other way around. So there's a bit of call flowing to be done. And interestingly, Microsoft needs to play along, right?
Yep.
And Apple needs to play along. And currently they don't. And, I'm not sure it's in Apple's interest to actually do this just because of the use case, right? So they may want people to stay exactly on that iPad, iPhone kind of behavior. Why Microsoft and Windows 11 isn't playing along, I'm not quite sure. So maybe you guys have that leverage to change that. So I'm hopeful this will actually work out. I think, though, once we have deployed this, there's no way back. People will just really use it, and they will wonder, why haven't we done this over the last 10 years? And the other thing I'm very excited about is when we have solved it for the laptop, we're going to take exactly the same thing, Control-C, Control-V, and we bring it straight into the VR headsets, right? So I tried the Quest 3 and Vision Pro, and I can't wait to have my 10 screens in there and work there, and not being bothered by my colleagues and get just really my stuff really going. So I think, this will just start an avalanche, which hopefully will be a really exciting next surprising use case after FWA, which, 5-10 years ago, nobody thought about.
And then when we saw this also a lot of societal equity aspects during COVID, we had gigabit fiber at home. So it wasn't a big deal for my kids to do schooling from home. That's obviously not universally true in a lot of different zip codes. And it was this interesting challenge then of the role of cellular laptops in helping on the digital divide for education during the homeschooling 2020-2021 era. And I think that's another interesting one that, like, once you have it, it becomes a behavioral issue. I have a 5G laptop, I just open it and then you're working. I know, Carl, from your side, anecdotally, what is your perspective on the technical part versus the usability?
Yeah, the thing that I think what Rob was saying and Kari also about just sometimes the barriers to adoption are kind of simple. They're just like, I don't want to go through 10 steps to access something, and that's actually another, I think, powerful part that AI is going to help with is some of the limits to adopting things like augmented reality. We do use augmented reality, for example, for navigation, like to get directions to get here from the hotel or whatever. Like, that is a type of augmented reality. And what's keeping us from going farther is sometimes just the interface. What are the steps I need? And that's a powerful thing that I think AI is going to do, is make it so much easier for our devices to understand what it is that we want. And maybe help us break down some of these barriers, these button pushing, and a lot of things that keep us from adopting these.
So the kind of
advanced
predictability part, because I think that's when I was joking when I first learned how to do like a macro in Lotus 1-2-3 to date myself. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. Like, and you press the button, do. And then the notion, though, of, as you're saying, the mouse clicks. I know Kamal's in the audience too. We can joke around about Workday for those of you who have to do performance reviews, and we literally have an executive level team's discussion about how to do performance reviews across our organization, and the number of mouse clicks to rate your colleague is hilarious. I'm sure for Ericsson and all my colleagues here, it's just as bad. So, and we also joke about the role of generative AI in writing performance reviews if you have a large team. So that's also, another big one. Okay, so then on the topic of IoT, so we talked a little bit, right, in the 5G triangle. Two of the vertices were IoT, mission critical, the high reliability, low latency, so-called 5G connected factory. And then we had the wide area IoT. And obviously we're very familiar with the 4G IoT technologies, NB-IoT and Cat M1 and BIS and all that stuff. How do you guys see, and each of you should answer this, like, what do you think is the most interesting IoT scenario and priority that's kind of additive to the other stuff we've already talked about in terms of smartphone and XR and laptop, et cetera? So feel free to answer in any order.
I built one of Europe's largest IoT companies, so I know quite a lot about the actual challenges in the IoT market, and I think some of us are quite disgruntled on how fragmented that market is, how difficult. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful again. So I think the future is really droids and drones, as I say. So it's really about the skies being populated by a lot of, whether these are delivery drones or whether these are larger taxis flying around. And of course, the droid ecosystem in Silicon Valley is actually really exploding at the moment. It's crazy. And I'm seeing some of the data rates, and this is stuff you can't compress, so you can't throw semantic communications at that for SLA reasons. I think, Rob, you mentioned that, right? So it's pretty serious stuff you need to deliver there, and then networks suddenly will be back. So droids and drones, I think, is really the way to go.
Okay.
It makes me smile a little thinking about some of those forecasts that were made maybe 5-6 years ago, how we would have tens of billions of IoT devices in our networks by, I don't know, this time around. It didn't happen. And
hopefully those slides are not stored on the CWC website.
But I don't think it was because there was no need for those types of applications and use cases. It was, and I think Misha hit the nail in the head, it's because of complexity and fragmentation that took place in that domain that drove up the cost and created some challenges in adopting some of these use cases. But that doesn't mean, like I said, that there's no need for those types of things. There absolutely is. We just have to figure out what's the right way of bringing these things to the market so we don't end up overcooking some of these modules and devices with multiple different bands and multiple different IoT capabilities that have cost implications. But it is not easy looking at how complex the network side is and how we use different spectrum bands for different use cases. It's not simple. But there's a lot of promise, and I think we're getting to a point where it's slowly starting to pickup speed. And with the introduction of things like RedCap, and I'm actually quite excited about ambient IoT down the road, that has a lot of potential because it solves some of the fundamental issues, especially for those IoT applications that are mobile in nature, that you don't have to worry about how to power them, or that are very remote in, like, say, agricultural fields or stuff like that. So it's going to come, but I think there's work to be done on our side, and I don't mean just the operators, I mean the ecosystem that we live in general, to simplify the adoption of IoT for these use cases that, you know, makes most sense. What worries me is that we jump too far in adopting some of these capabilities like RedCap for wrong reasons. And the reason why I'm saying that is that obviously reduced capability also means reduced spectral efficiency to a certain extent. And if we apply it for the wrong use cases, then the negative effect on networks is probably going to be pretty, you know, maybe not significant, but something that we should pay attention to. So we have to have the right tool for the right problem. We have to, you know, not try to put a square peg in a round hole and so on. But we'll get there. And I think there's a lot of potential in IoT space down the road.
Thank you.
Maybe just a quick comment. So we don't have tens of billions or billions of devices, but we do have tens of millions of devices, IoT devices in our network today. And where we see growth, at least in particular, is in automotive. There's a huge uptake from the automotive industry to use IoT embedded in the automobiles for a variety of different reasons. And we think that's a huge opportunity overall in terms of growth, but also finally, as that data becomes more available, it becomes more valuable itself, because you start to understand usage, you start to understand location. Those things become things that can be monetized. Otherwise, you know, it's not particularly impressive the amount of money we get out of the tens of millions of devices that we have today in the network, because they don't charge much. IoT comes with some very unique challenges compared to mobile or compared to drones or droids or laptops, in that they have to stay in the network for a very long time. So that means you have to make your decisions wisely. And I think as an industry, we've struggled with making some of those decisions in a particularly wise way. NB-IoT is a classic example of a failure. Technology, interesting, technology works, technology succeeds, but it's a market failure. It underestimated that or overestimated the value of having something that was that lightweight. We're having a lot of discussions about, do we need a replacement for Cat-M? And we pushed for that in Addis and said, okay, we need that in the 5G, 6G era. It kind of spills to, well, IoT is not aligned with the 10G cycle. So we introduced Cat-M, we introduced NB-IoT in the 2016, 2017 timeframe, long after LTE was introduced. And now, of course, we're introducing RedCap, and we'll see it commercially viable in 25 and 26. Again, long after we introduced 5G. We need it because we want to retire actually some of those devices that we have, and they typically have a 10-year lifespan in the network. So when we make these decisions about IoT, I think we have to start to think forward of what do we really need, and on what, and how does it drive the evolution of the network? And I do believe that ultimately it may actually create those anchor points for us, because for us, we're already starting to think of, well, we can't retire LTE simply because we have too many IoT devices running on Cat-M and they can't be swapped out fast enough. They're embedded in places where you can't easily remove them, or they're not software upgradable to 5G or to 6G or whatever G you want to throw them on. So I think for us, there is an opportunity for sure on IoT. I think it will continue to emerge, especially in automotive, especially around things around sustainability. And we shouldn't think of it in terms of energy consumption. Everyone always thinks that sustainability is about energy, but it's also about logistics. You think of how we got here and what was required to get us to this place that we're sitting in right now. There are lots of decisions that you can make that ultimately determine how much energy is consumed based on how you got here. By the same token, when we ship things around with drones or with droids or otherwise, we have to think about the overall supply chain as we get things from factories, wherever they are, all the way out to the end user. How do you control the amount of energy that's being consumed to get them there? And we think that IoT will actually play a significant role in terms of how things become sustainable. And this is a really exciting opportunity for driving network evolution. And hopefully this time we get it right and it doesn't end up with a situation where we have, you know, a market failure, even if we have a technology success.
Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of the directions we talk about with 6G, like becoming more more open, more with APIs and just creating a space or a platform where people can collaborate more. I think there are still a lot of exciting directions, things that once this sort of little obstacles of exactly which technology to use kind of get smoothed out, that very creative people will come up with amazing ways to use IoT, for sustainability. They're used already for amazing ways in science. I read a book about winged migration and how much they've learned about migration of birds by attaching little network capable devices to these tiny birds, and there'll be so many interesting and creative ways that people use these capabilities once it gets a little easier.
And I think that's the kind of really interesting point that you all kind of hit on in slightly different ways about scale.
Yeah.
And even as we look at like a conference like this, a summit, bringing together so many different parts of the technology ecosystem, academic ecosystem, and technology players, it's understanding, okay, well, how can we make the right investment, give a long enough tail so that we don't have to make a perfect bet early, but we're still able to have that investment, give rise to a broader usage. And I think that's part of the soul searching, in some sense, the industry's on, as we're looking, okay, yeah, we're not even like calling it 6G is a little, not a game plan at AT&T, because, oh my God, they don't get us into this. We got to rip out 5G and spend another billions and billions of dollars. Let's think of it as a more CI/CD standpoint. Yeah, there is that reality that consumers aren't paying substantially more per month for their data. So, and then IoT companies is a long tail. And so you have this interesting combination of, these multiplicative factors of IoT was supposed to be, as we said, billions of devices, and they could be costing a lot less per month, and the subscription model could be really built into the data monetization. But it's really an interesting part where, as we're doing this, challenging ourselves even right now in integrated sensing or in spectrum sharing, all these different technologies, it's about understanding that long-term opportunity and saying, okay, we're not going to perfectly steer all these different ships, but let's try to make sure we don't have a fundamental error in terms of an investment not being able to be, hitting these different use cases. So I did want to take this chance to also thank all of the moderates, for the participants here, for your kind of interesting, insightful comments on a wide range of topics. And I think we have a lot of exciting other stuff coming today. And so thank you again for participating and making your way down to San Diego or across to San Diego. And we'll look forward to the next sessions. So thank you.